The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty classroom windows, casting long golden streaks across the rows of wooden desks. The school was old, with walls that carried the faint marks of years gone by, the faded paint and the creaking floorboards, told stories of countless students who had passed through. But on this particular day, something unforgettable was about to unfold. The classroom buzzed with the restless energy of children who had already sat through several hours of lessons. Some tapped their pencils against their desks. Others whispered quietly to their friends, while a few stared out the window, wishing they could already go home. The air was heavy, not just with the heat of the day, but with the unspoken tension that came whenever their teacher entered the room. He was a man who carried himself with authority, his footsteps echoing loudly in the hallway before he even opened the door. Students often fell silent at the sound of his shoes striking the floor, as though they feared what might come next. He had a reputation for being strict, not the kind of teacher who inspired respect through kindness, but rather one who demanded it through control and intimidation. His sharp eyes seemed to search for mistakes, and his words could cut deep when he chose to use them. On this day, he entered the classroom with the same stern expression he always wore, scanning the room as if deciding who would be his target. The students quickly straightened up, forcing themselves to appear attentive, though their hearts raced in anticipation of what he might say. The teacher had a way of making even the smallest action feel like a test. Among the group of students sat a quiet girl, often unnoticed by her classmates. She was not one to speak out of turn or draw attention to herself. She kept her head down, her notebooks neat, her pencils sharpened, and her thoughts to herself. Though her silence made her seem invisible, it also made her vulnerable. Teachers, like him, often preyed on those who appeared timid, using them as examples to assert their dominance. The girl sat near the back, her gaze lowered, hoping not to be singled out. She listened carefully to every word, but she also carried a secret, a gift that few around her knew about. Outside of the classroom, in the safety of her home, she found comfort in the piano, an old instrument her family cherished. Music was her world, a place where she felt free, where the weight of silence was replaced by melodies that spoke louder than words. But in school, that part of her life remained hidden. The atmosphere in the room was thick as the teacher moved slowly between the desks. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but commanding, a tone that demanded attention without needing to shout. He asked questions, snapped at wrong answers, and made his way toward the corner where the upright piano stood, unused and collecting dust. The piano had been there for years, a leftover from when the school once cared about music lessons. Now, it stood as a silent decoration, often ignored. A reminder of a time when creativity had a place in the classroom. The teacher stopped in front of it. A strange smile crossed his face. He tapped the piano lid with his knuckles, the sound echoing in the quiet room. The students exchanged glances, unsure of what he was planning. His eyes scanned the classroom once more, and then they landed on the quiet girl in the back. A moment, her heart seemed to stop. She could feel his gaze, heavy and sharp, so he could see through her carefully built wall of silence. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The girl's palms grew sweaty, and she tried to make herself smaller in her seat, praying that he would turn his attention elsewhere. But fate, it seemed, had chosen her for this moment. The teacher's smirk widened as he called her name, his voice echoing through the room like a challenge. Every head turned toward her. The whispers stopped. The pencils froze mid-tap. All eyes were on the quiet girl who rarely spoke. Her classmates watched with a mix of curiosity and pity, wondering why she, of all people, had caught his attention. The teacher's expression was not one of encouragement, but of amusement, as though he already anticipated her failure. He gestured toward the piano, his voice laced with mockery as he told her to come forward. He spoke in a way that made it sound less like an invitation and more like an order. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been asked to show her talent here, never been given the chance to share what she truly loved. And now, the request was not made with kindness, but with cruelty, meant to turn her into a joke, a source of laughter for the class. She knew this was not about music, was about control. The classroom, once buzzing with noise, now felt silent enough to hear a pin drop. The other students leaned forward slightly. Their curiosity piqued. Some expected her to refuse, others thought she might stumble her way through and give the teacher the satisfaction he craved. No one could imagine what was really about to happen. In that tense moment, as she slowly rose from her seat, the entire classroom became a stage. And every detail, the sunlight through the windows, the dust in the air, the teacher's mocking smile, the expectant eyes of her classmates seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note in a story that was only just beginning. The quiet girl sat near the back of the classroom, her body slightly hunched, as though she wished to shrink into her chair and disappear. She had always been the kind of student who did not seek attention. Her notebooks were neat, her handwriting small and precise, and her answers correct when asked, but she spoke softly, almost as if she worried that her voice might disturb the air around her. Many of her classmates hardly noticed her presence. To them, she was just the girl who sat quietly, never causing trouble, never raising her hand too high, never laughing too loud. But to the teacher that day, she was more than just another student. She was the perfect target. This teacher was not the sort who celebrated kindness or encouraged his students to shine. He thrived on control, on the fear he could create with a sharp word or a humiliating demand. When the classroom grew restless, he searched for someone to put on the spot, someone whose discomfort would remind the others to behave. It was a power he enjoyed, and the quiet girl's silence was, to him, an invitation. His eyes swept across the rows of desks, lingering briefly on students who met his gaze before darting away in fear. And then his stare stopped at her. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, and the girl could feel the weight of his attention pressing down on her. Her stomach tightened. She had felt this before, that uneasy dread when she sensed someone was about to single her out. She lowered her gaze to her open notebook, pretending to read, but it was too late. The teacher had already chosen. With a slow, deliberate step, he walked closer to her row. The sound of his shoes striking the floor echoed loudly in the otherwise hushed room. Every student's eyes followed him, curiosity rising in their faces. Who would he pick this time? What game of control would he play? The teacher stopped, turned his head, and fixed his gaze on her. A smile spread across his face, but it was not warm. It was a smile that promised embarrassment. "You," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Stand up." The girl froze. She wished desperately that he had spoken to someone else. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her notebook, her heart thumping so hard she thought others might hear it. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her knees weak beneath her. The teacher studied her for a moment, as if savoring her discomfort. He liked this, the pause before the strike. The rest of the class turned in their seats, some curious, others pitying. A few suppressing nervous giggles. Everyone could sense what was coming, but no one dared to intervene. The teacher then pointed toward the old piano in the corner of the room. "Go there," he commanded. Her eyes followed his finger, and her breath caught the piano. That silent instrument no one had touched for years. She knew it well. She had seen it every day in the classroom, ignored, gathering dust. For her, a girl who loved music in secret, it was not just wood and keys. It was a part of her world. But here, under the teacher's cruel stare, it felt like a trap. Confusion flickered across her face, and the teacher's smirk deepened. "Play something for us," he said mockingly. His tone made it clear this was no invitation to share her talent. It was a demand designed to shame her. The students gasped softly. A piano performance in the middle of a regular lesson. It was unheard of. But they all knew what this really was. The teacher had chosen her because he thought she would stumble. He expected her to press the wrong keys, to produce awkward sounds that would draw laughter from her classmates. It was a cruel game, and he was the one pulling the strings. The girl's heart pounded faster. She wanted to protest, to say she couldn't, to tell him she wasn't ready. But the teacher's glare left no room for refusal. She had seen what happened to others who disobeyed him, public scoldings that left them in tears. Punishments that embarrassed them further. She could not bear that, so, with hesitant steps, she began to move toward the piano. The classroom seemed to watch her every movement. The sound of her shoes against the floor echoed in her ears, magnified by the silence of the room. She could feel her classmates' eyes on her back, their whispers swallowed by the heavy air. When she reached the piano, she stood still, staring at it as though it were both a friend and an enemy. She had played many times before, but never like this. Never with so many eyes waiting for her to fail. She lifted her hand and gently brushed the dust from the keys, her reflection faintly visible on the polished surface. Behind her, the teacher crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said impatiently, "we are waiting." The words stung. He wasn't asking, he was mocking. His voice dripped with sarcasm, as though he already knew the outcome. To him, this was entertainment. To the girl, it was humiliation. But, in that moment, something stirred inside her. Beneath the fear, beneath the shame, there was another feeling, a small spark of defiance. She knew the teacher wanted her to fail. He wanted laughter, not music. And that realization gave her a strange sense of strength. Her classmates waited in silence, some leaning forward, others covering their mouths with their hands, bracing for whatever sound might come from the piano. The girl, still trembling, slowly lowered herself onto the bench. She placed her hands carefully on the keys, her fingers hovering above them. The teacher smirked again, certain this would end as a lesson in ridicule. But he had no idea what was about to happen next. The classroom grew unnaturally quiet as the girl sat before the piano. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight that cut across the room, landing gently on the keys as though even the air was waiting for her to move. Her small hands hovered nervously above the instrument, her fingers trembling with both fear and possibility. Behind her, the teacher stood with arms crossed, watching like a judge waiting for a guilty verdict. His smirk deepened, and though he didn't say it aloud, his expression told the class what he expected, that this quiet, timid girl would stumble and fail. To him, this was not about music. It was about control, about showing everyone that he could bend even the quietest student into a spectacle for his own amusement. The students leaned in, some whispering nervously, others hiding smiles. They were caught between sympathy and curiosity. On one hand, they pitied her. On the other, they couldn't help but wonder what disaster they were about to witness. Nobody, not even her closest classmates, knew she could actually play. To them, she was invisible most of the time, a shadow in the back row. And now, that shadow was being dragged into the brightest spotlight of the classroom. "Go on," the teacher said sharply, his voice breaking the silence like a crack of a whip. "Surely, you know how to press a few keys, or is even that too difficult for you?" The words cut like a blade. He wasn't just instructing her, he was belittling her, mocking her intelligence, her ability, her worth. His tone was laced with sarcasm, each syllable dripping with cruelty. The class shifted uncomfortably, and a few students let out stifled chuckles, encouraged by the teacher's ridicule. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the keys in front of her. She could feel her cheeks burning, not just from embarrassment, but from the sting of injustice. This wasn't fair. She hadn't asked to be singled out. She hadn't volunteered to perform. She was being used. Her silence turned against her. Still, she didn't move. The teacher's impatience grew. He tapped his foot against the floor, the sound echoing through the silent room. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "Don't tell me you're too shy. Come now, give us a performance." The word performance dripped with mockery. He wasn't asking her to play music. He was demanding she put on a show, a comedy of errors for the amusement of her peers. His cruel smile widened as he imagined her fumbling, producing clumsy sounds that would confirm what he already believed, that she was weak, untalented, insignificant. Some students giggled nervously, but others sat in tense silence, their eyes darting between the teacher and the girl. A few hoped she would refuse, that she would shake her head and say no. But they knew what would happen if she did. Refusing him was worse than failing him. The punishment would be sharp, public, unforgettable. The girl's hands shook as she lowered them toward the keys. The piano felt cold beneath her fingertips, and her mind screamed at her to run, to escape this moment. Yet somewhere deep inside her, another voice whispered louder, a voice she often heard when she played alone at home. It was the voice that reminded her of who she was when no one else was watching. The girl who lost herself in melodies, spoke through music what she could never say aloud. But the teacher could not hear that voice. To him, she was still a target, a victim for his lesson in control. He turned slightly to the class, his smirk widening as though sharing a private joke with them. "Watch carefully, everyone," he said. "This is what happens when you sit quietly all day, pretending to be invisible. Let's see if she can even manage a simple note." The words stung even deeper. He was not only mocking her, he was using her as an example, a warning to the others. The message was clear. Anyone could be humiliated if they crossed him or dared to remain too quiet for his liking. The class shifted uneasily. Some laughed nervously. Others avoided her eyes, not wanting to be associated with her shame. But every single one of them leaned closer in anticipation, waiting for the moment when her failure would confirm the teacher's cruel expectations. The girl inhaled slowly, her chest tight, her heart racing. She pressed a single key, and the sound rang out in the silence, clear, trembling. The teacher chuckled under his breath. "Is that all?" he said mockingly. "One note. Perhaps that's enough for someone like you." The class tittered with laughter, their unease broken by the teacher's sarcasm. But the girl's fingers stayed on the keys. Her eyes closed for a moment, and she breathed deeply again. Something inside her shifted. That spark she had felt earlier grew stronger, burning away the fear little by little. The teacher, oblivious to the change, continued to mock. "Well then," he said loudly, addressing the class, "let's give her a round of applause for her brilliant single note. Quite the performance, isn't it?" The students laughed again, some louder this time, encouraged by his words. But their laughter began to fade as they noticed the girl's hands no longer trembling. Her posture straightened. Her eyes opened, focused, and calm. And though the teacher still smirked, his voice faltered as he saw her fingers glide into position. Both hands poised over the keys with a confidence that didn't match his expectations. For the first time, the balance of power in the room began to shift. What had begun as mockery was about to turn into something no one, least of all the teacher, could have imagined. The classroom still buzzed faintly with the echoes of laughter. But now, there was something else in the air, something unspoken. The girl sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, she did not move. She seemed frozen, caught between the weight of humiliation and the spark of defiance that had begun to stir inside her. Her chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. Her mind was torn. Part of her wanted to push the bench back, stand up, and walk away. To retreat into the safety of her seat, to avoid further embarrassment, to let the teacher's cruel smirk win. The humiliation would sting, yes, but at least it would end. But another part of her, a deeper, stronger part, was whispering something different. That voice, soft but insistent, reminded her of the countless nights she had spent at home with the old piano in her living room. It reminded her of the times she had poured her feelings into music when words had failed. It reminded her that she was not powerless, not voiceless. Her hesitation lingered like a heavy shadow. The students leaned forward, expecting her to fumble. The teacher tapped his fingers against his arm, his smirk returning as if he were already savoring her defeat. "Any day now," he sneered, his voice dripping with impatience. "Or should I find someone else who can actually play?" The words burned her like fire. Her lips trembled and her eyes stung with the threat of tears. But as her fingers hovered above the keys, something changed. She thought of her mother's gentle encouragement, of her late grandmother who had taught her. Her very first song. Of all the times music had carried her through pain and loneliness, she could not let this moment destroy her. She would not give him the satisfaction. The hesitation began to fade, replaced by a strange calm. Her back straightened, her shoulders lifted. The trembling in her hands slowed until her fingers were steady. She inhaled one last deep breath. And when she opened her eyes, there was a fire in them that none of her classmates had ever seen before. The teacher noticed it too, though he did not understand it. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He had expected fear, shame, stumbling. What he saw instead was resolve. He masked his uncertainty with another sarcastic chuckle. "Well then," he said, raising his eyebrows. "By all means, impress us." The girl pressed her first chord. This time, it was not a single hesitant note, but a harmony that filled the room, warm and strong. The sound lingered in the air, cutting through the silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. The students shifted in their seats, surprised. This was not the sound of someone fumbling blindly. This was the sound of someone who knew. Her courage grew with each note. She began to play a melody she knew by heart, one that lived inside her like a secret voice. Her fingers glided across the keys, confident and fluid. What had begun as hesitation transformed into something powerful. The classroom was no longer a prison. It had become her stage. Every chord she struck grew louder, bolder. The teacher's smirk began to fade, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. This was not the humiliation he had planned. This was something else entirely, something he could not control. The girl did not look at him. She did not look at her classmates. She was lost in the music, in the courage that had finally burst free from within her. Each note carried her pain, her silence, her hidden strength. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her all along, waiting for this moment when she would rise above fear and show the truth of who she was. The classmates who had once giggled were now silent. Their eyes widened, their mouths slightly open. They had never seen her like this, never imagined she could play with such emotion and skill. The girl they had thought of as quiet, shy, invisible, was now commanding the entire room without saying a single word. Her hesitation was gone. In its place was a force that no one could mock, a courage that silenced laughter and demanded respect. The teacher, who had mocked her into this moment, now stood frozen, his arms uncrossing slowly, as though he could not believe what he was hearing. He had set a trap meant to humiliate her, but instead, he had unlocked a performance that made even him feel small. The music swelled, growing more passionate, more powerful. It was no longer just a melody. It was a declaration. With every note, she was saying what she had never been able to put into words. I am not weak. I am not invisible. I am more than your ridicule. And as the final notes rang out, echoing against the old classroom walls, the courage that had begun as a small spark inside her now burned brightly for everyone to see. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The hesitation had ended, the courage had spoken, and the classroom was forever changed. The moment her fingers truly connected with the keys, it was as if something inside her had broken free. What began as hesitation transformed into strength, and what started as fear slowly became power. The first notes were steady but careful, like a bird testing its wings. Then, with each passing second, the sound grew fuller, bolder, rising into a melody that seemed too rich, too graceful to come from a student who had moments ago been trembling under the teacher's gaze. The classroom shifted. Students who had been leaning lazily in their seats sat upright, their attention locked on her. The nervous giggles had vanished. Even the whispers stopped. The music had demanded their silence in a way no teacher ever could. The girl's courage, once hidden, now filled every corner of the room, speaking through the piano with a voice that was impossible to ignore. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but it was no longer from fear. It was from exhilaration, from the rush of realizing she had chosen not to let her silence define her. The spark of courage that had begun as a whisper inside her mind now roared like fire. Each key she pressed was a refusal, a rejection of the humiliation that had been planned for her. The teacher, standing near the piano with his arms still crossed, shifted uncomfortably. His smirk had vanished, replaced by something unreadable. His eyes narrowed, but they betrayed his surprise. He had thought she would stumble, that her hands would falter, and the class would laugh. Instead, he found himself staring at a performance that seemed to grow more commanding with every passing note. She was no longer just playing. She was pouring herself into the music, every unspoken word, every swallowed thought, every moment of silence that had been forced on her. The melody wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It rose and fell with her emotions, weaving a story no words could capture. The classmates could feel it, even if they didn't understand it fully. They felt the sadness in the softer notes, the strength in the louder chords, the hope in the way her fingers danced across the keys. The spark of courage inside her had become something more. It had become defiance. She was not just obeying the teacher's command, she was turning his cruelty into her triumph. What he had meant as mockery became the very stage for her brilliance. The classroom, once suffocating, now felt like it belonged to her. She no longer felt small. She no longer felt invisible. She was not the quiet girl in the back row anymore. She was the girl who could silence an entire classroom with nothing but the sound of her music. Her classmates leaned forward, mesmerized. Some had their mouths slightly open, unable to believe what they were witnessing. They had always thought of her as someone fragile, someone easy to overlook. Now, she was showing them a side of herself they never imagined existed. A few of them even felt a pang of guilt for the times they had ignored her or joined in the laughter at her expense. They realized in that moment how wrong they had been. As she continued, the spark inside her grew brighter. Her courage became confidence, and her confidence became power. The piano, neglected for years, seemed to respond eagerly to her touch, as though it had been waiting for someone like her to bring it back to life. The notes filled not just the room, but the hearts of everyone listening. The teacher's throat tightened as he stood watching. He had always prided himself on his control, his ability to command respect through intimidation. Yet here he was, silenced by the very student he had tried to humiliate. He could not laugh, could not interrupt. The music held him captive, just as it held everyone else, and the girl felt it. For the first time, she felt the balance of power tipped in her favor. She was not a victim anymore. She was not performing for him or for the class. She was performing for herself, for the voice inside her that had always believed she could rise above. The spark of courage had turned into a flame, and that flame blazed through every note. Her fingers moved faster now, confident and graceful. She closed her eyes, not because of fear, but because she no longer needed to see. The music guided her. Her soul guided her. The classroom faded. The teacher's smirk faded. The whispers faded. All that remained was her and the piano. And in that space, she was free. When the melody reached its peak, the room felt transformed. The students forgot they were sitting in old wooden desks. They forgot about the dusty chalkboard, the teacher's scowls, the heavy silence that usually hung in the room. For those few minutes, the classroom was a concert hall, and the quiet girl was its star. The final notes lingered in the air like a secret that refused to leave. Her fingers rested on the keys, her chest rising and falling as the last echoes faded. She opened her eyes slowly, her courage still burning brightly inside her. The silence that followed was unlike any silence before. It wasn't the silence of fear or tension, it was the silence of awe. The spark of courage had grown into a fire that had consumed the teacher's mockery, the classmates' doubts, and her own hesitation. She had turned what was meant to shame her into a moment that none of them would ever forget. And as she sat there, her hands still resting gently on the keys, she realized something life-changing. She had not just found her courage, she had revealed her power. The first chords had captured their attention, but as the melody deepened, the classroom began to change in ways no one could have imagined. The girl's fingers no longer trembled. They moved with a rhythm that felt both natural and powerful, as though the piano had always belonged to her. Every note spilled into the air like a secret finally set free, weaving a story that needed no words. The classroom itself seemed to hold its breath. The dust that floated in the golden light from the windows shimmered like tiny sparks caught in the currents of sound. The walls, chipped and faded with age, seemed to soften, almost as though they were listening too. For so long, this room had been filled with commands, with sharp words and heavy silences. But now, it was filled with music, pure, unshakable. Music that reached into every corner. Her classmates sat frozen, their bodies tilted forward, their eyes fixed on her hands. The boy who had been doodling in the margins of his notebook earlier now had his pencil still. The girl who often whispered jokes to her friend sat with her chin resting in her hands, eyes wide with amazement. Even the ones who had snickered when the teacher first called her up were silent now, their faces glowing with disbelief. It wasn't just talent they heard, it was emotion. Every note carried something from deep inside her. The pain of being overlooked, the loneliness of silence, the hidden beauty of her spirit. She was telling them everything she had never been able to say aloud. And she was doing it without speaking a single word. The teacher's smirk was gone. His eyes, once sharp and mocking, were now unsteady, flickering between the girl's face and her hands. He had expected clumsy notes, a pitiful attempt that would make her the butt of a cruel joke. Instead, he was standing in the presence of something he couldn't control, something greater than his authority. He shifted uncomfortably, but still he could not look away. The music swelled, filling the air with a richness that made the classroom feel transformed. It no longer felt like an old room with dusty walls and wooden desks. For a few moments, it felt like a grand hall where the girl was not a student under pressure, but a performer commanding her audience. Her courage had grown into something so much larger it had become presence as the melody unfolded. She closed her eyes, not to hide, but to connect even deeper with the song. The piano was no longer an instrument to her, it was her voice. Each key spoke with honesty and strength. And the music carried her emotions like a river rushing toward the sea. The classmates could feel it too. They could sense her heart in the music, the sadness in the softer notes, the strength in the rising chords. the hope in the way her fingers danced confidently across the keys. Some of them felt goosebumps rise on their arms. Others felt their throats tighten, as though the music was speaking directly to a part of them they didn't even know existed. No one laughed now. No one dared to. The girl herself felt something extraordinary happening. She had begun with fear, with the thought of being mocked. But as the music unfolded, she realized she wasn't playing for the teacher or for her classmates. She was playing for herself. For the little girl who had once been too afraid to raise her voice. For the child who had found comfort in the piano late at night, whispering secrets into the keys. For the soul that had always known she was capable of more. The longer she played, the more the fear inside her melted away. In its place came freedom, pure, unshakable freedom. She no longer felt the heavy eyes of the teacher on her. She no longer felt the expectation of failure pressing against her chest. She only felt the music flowing through her like blood in her veins. The classroom was transformed into silence so complete that it felt alive. Even the sound of her classmates' breathing seemed to fade beneath the strength of her song. The teacher, who had begun this as a cruel game, was powerless now. His plan had slipped away from him, replaced by something he could not stop. And as the final notes of her song rose and fell, the music became more than a performance, became a revelation. Every student in that room realized they were witnessing something rare, something unforgettable. They weren't just listening to a girl play the piano. They were listening to courage, to resilience, to the undeniable truth that brilliance can shine even in the darkest of moments. The last chord echoed in the air, lingering like a prayer. Her fingers rested on the keys, her body still, her heart racing, but steady in its strength. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had paused, bowing in respect to the music that had just unfolded. And then, silence. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of ridicule, but the silence of awe, the kind that follows something too beautiful to interrupt. The girl opened her eyes slowly. She did not look at the teacher. She did not even look at her classmates. She looked only at the piano, the instrument that had carried her voice when she could not. And she smiled, just a little, because she knew that whatever came next, he had changed everything in that room. The music had unfolded, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the conference hall was thick, almost unbearable. Every pair of eyes stared at her, some filled with fear, others with guilt, a few with shame. No one dared to look confident anymore. The arrogance that had filled the room earlier had vanished the moment she walked in. The CEO stood at the head of the table, her hand resting lightly on the closed notebook. Her gaze was steady, unshaken, sweeping across each face like a spotlight that exposed every hidden flaw. She could see it in their expressions, the panic of those who knew they were guilty, the unease of those who had witnessed wrongdoing, but stayed silent, the quiet relief of the few who had remained true to the company's values. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but filled with authority. This company was not built to serve arrogance. It was not built so that people in power could trample those beneath them. It was built on respect, on dignity, on integrity. And yet, in this very room, those values have been forgotten. A ripple of discomfort ran through the managers. One shifted in his chair. Another looked down at the table, avoiding her eyes. No one spoke. She opened the notebook slowly, the sound of its pages filling the quiet. She glanced at it for a moment, then looked up. For weeks, I have seen things I never thought I would see in my own company. I have watched managers mock their employees, dismiss their assistants, and abuse their positions. I have listened. Two leaders boast about fear instead of respect. And I have witnessed arrogance so deep that even Etha's CEO was told to wait outside. Her words cut through the room like knives. Several people flinched. A woman near the end of the table gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. "This ends today," the CEO declared, her tone rising with each word. "Effective immediately, those who have failed this company's values are dismissed. You will leave your positions today. You will not return tomorrow. You have no place in a company where respect is not optional." The room erupted in a wave of reactions. Some managers sat stunned, their faces pale, unable to process what they had just heard. Others began whispering in panic, their voices trembling. One man stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "You can't be serious," he shouted. "We've kept this company profitable. The CEO cut him off with a single look. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as steel, and her voice came firm and cold. Profit does not excuse arrogance. Success does not excuse cruelty. If you believe money matters more than humanity, then you have already failed." The man sat back down. Heavily, his face flushed with humiliation. The CEO continued, her voice unwavering. "Leadership is not about titles. Leadership is about how you treat those who depend on you. It is about lifting others, not crushing them. And if you cannot live by that truth, then you are not a leader. You are a liability." She closed the notebook again and placed it firmly on the table. "Those of you whose names are written here know who you are. When this meeting ends, you will gather your things and leave this building. Security will escort you out if necessary. There will be no arguments, no excuses, no delays." The weight of her words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Some managers hung their heads, tears forming in their eyes. Others clenched their fists, anger burning in their expressions, but none of them dared to challenge her. They knew she meant every word. Then her voice softened slightly, but it carried even more power. "To those of you who have remained kind, who have shown respect even when no one was watching, you are the reason this company still has hope. You are the reason I will rebuild what arrogance tried to destroy. And you will lead the way forward." The employees sitting near the back, the assistants and interns, exchanged glances. For the first time in a long while, they felt seen. They felt valued. A spark of hope lit in their eyes, hope that things would finally change. The CEO straightened, her shoulders, her presence commanding the room completely. "This company is not yours to corrupt," she said, her voice strong. "It is ours to protect. And today, we protect it not with profits, not with pride, but with respect." The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to move. Number one dared to speak. Then she stepped away from the table, gathering her bag with calm grace. Her voice, steady and final, echoed through the room. "The era of arrogance is over. If you cannot respect others, you cannot stay here. That is my decision. That is final." And with that, she turned and walked toward the door, her heels striking the floor like the closing notes of a symphony. The managers sat frozen in their seats, knowing that their world had just changed forever. The bold decision had been made. The reckoning had begun.